Welcome to the Healing for Male Survivors podcast. This is a podcast for male survivors of sexual abuse and assault, whether as a child or as an adult. Know that you are not alone and the abuse was not your fault. My name is Mike Chapman. I'm a certified recovery life coach and also a survivor. Let's find hope and healing together. And welcome to the Healing for Male Survivors podcast. I'm your host, Mike Chapman, and we have a special episode today. I want to talk about two things that are on my heart. The first is an update on the Kyle and Erik Menéndez trial. I spoke about that back in episode 47. If you want to see my thoughts there have been some updates on the case, and when this episode posts, which is early March, there's probably going to be additional updates, and I might do additional podcast episodes to share my thoughts on the case there as well. So first, let me go to the latest update that since the initial reconsideration for the Menendez brothers, that Los Angeles County District Attorney lost the election, got replaced, and the new district attorney took on the review of the case to see what could go further. And apparently, the family and the attorneys are taking several routes. So this is not an end all. This is one of those routes. He put a stop to proceeding that one way, having a new trial for the Menendez brothers. And the LA District Attorney opposes that. I don't know if it's completely blocked. I think it still might have to go for a judge for the judge's decision, but I think the District Attorney carries a lot of weight in the decision on this. And the reason for that was there was two additional very strong, compelling pieces of evidence. One was a letter that Erik wrote to his cousin, Andy Cano, C-A-N-O, in 1988, saying that the father sexually abused him. But the letter itself was not dated. I think they've done some forensic evidence of it and tried to figure out the date of when it was written. But apparently there was no actual date on the letter. But they're proposing it came from 88, before the shootings. And then the statement from Roy Rosello, who was a former member of the Latin pop group Menudo. He was abused by Jose Menendez as a teen in the 1980s. He came forward with this information in 2022, saying that Jose had drugged and raped him. That part of his story, and I talked about it on the last episode, in episode 47, on this, that apparently that band Menudo was also a sex trafficking front for the leader and organizer of that band, and I go into a little bit more depth in that episode. But stating that Jose Menendez, who was head of RCA Records at the time, that was when Menudo was signed under the RCA label as a band. And so to seal the deal, yes, that Roy was presented to Jose to be drugged and raped. And Hoffman disagreed with the letter because it was undated and unverified and not discovered during the original trial, and that Rosello's declaration would not be admissible because it would have no bearing on what the brothers' state of mind was when they killed their parents, because they would not know of this prior relationship, which is not the point of the letter. The point of the letter is to show that, yes, the father sexually abuses people, sexually abuses boys. That is the point of the letter, to further prove that, yes, sexual abuse history had a strong bearing on the case and should be reconsidered. The next way is pathway to freedom, as one article puts it, is the resentencing. That was scheduled for December, and that's what prompted me to discuss the case in episode 47. And that was delayed until the new district attorney had a chance to weigh in and review the case. But now it's set for March 20th and 21st because of the wildfires. So it got moved out further. So that's still up for consideration. So they could lessen their sentence, meaning that instead of the special consideration clause in the law, because it was such a heinous act or something like that, that they ignored the fact that they were both under 25 at the time of the murders and allowed them to have life sentences in prison, possibly death penalty too. I'm not sure how that works. But because that was added to the sentencing, special consideration was added. If that got removed, then they would still be guilty of murder, but because they were under 25 at the time, they would have been eligible for parole decades ago. So they would be able to be free from prison. So apparently that's still up for debate, and they are talking about that now. And so that's the hot news. And it's so frustrating. And this is why so many men and women don't pursue the justice system in their cases, because it's a mess, and it's a huge mess, that the justice system is not there. Is currently not set up to protect victims of sexual crimes, especially when it is incestual or family control trafficking, that they're not equipped to handle that. Many of these cases, all kinds of different cases, the justice system is not equipped to handle. So there's often no escape, and I'm not condoning what these boys did, but they were under such coercive control, and so many mental health experts are very clear that because of that coercive control, that they're in constant fear for their lives. And so much so that, yes, when the boys were asleep, he could come with a gun and kill them. And so because of that, they felt their life was at risk. And even though a gun was not pointed at their heads at the time, they felt compelled they had to kill him. If not, they were going to die. And so it's this gray area of self-defense, this self-defense law that they are talking about. And the current DA has very clear opinions on what is and is not self-defense, though I think so much more compelling evidence is out there now showing that, yeah, a gun does not have to be held to your head in cases of abuse, because, yes, you're literally fearing for your life constantly, constantly, and they ignore that fact. So, yeah, we'll keep you updated. I'm very much following this case, seeing how this goes for these individuals. And again, it ties back to my theme in this podcast, Power of Story, that Roy Rossello from Menudo shared his story. And when he shared it, he didn't even know that it was Jose Menendez who did all this. He just knew some record executive, and someone showed a picture. Oh my gosh, yes, that was him. And it says that was the Menendez's father. He wasn't familiar with the case, I believe. All of that is shared in several documentaries that are available. They're out there. I'll put the links in the show notes as well as to this. Okay, so moving forward, recently I was asked as part of the Survivor Network NC Speakers Bureau I am a part of to be interviewed by a local TV station in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I live in North Carolina. January is Commercial Sexual Exploitation of Children Awareness Month, also National Human Trafficking Prevention Month, and Sexual Assault Awareness Month. All of those are part of January, and I think because it was National Human Trafficking Prevention Month, they did this story. They interviewed me and two ladies. All three of us were affiliated with this organization, and also interviewed somebody else who works in anti-trafficking as well, an agency, and interviewed a few people from that agency to supplement the interviews that they gave for the three of us. I'll be focusing on my interview specifically in my experience, and I will have links in the show notes. So this was towards the end of January, and then it posted at the end of January, January 31st, and picked up by a few websites. Didn't really go national per se, but it was interesting. Let me share clips.
When many people think about the victims of human trafficking, they think about girls and women. But boys and men are also victims.
All day, Channel 9 has partnered with the nonprofit Safe House Project to spotlight this issue. Tonight, our Hannah Getz introduces you to a man focused on helping others after his own trafficking nightmare as a little child.
Yes, the Safe House Project, that was the group that then subcontracted with my speakers bureau that I'm with to be the voice of survivors. And then they share the activities they're involved with. And over the 3 different interviews, they mention all kinds of things, wonderful things that they're doing, which is wonderful. You know, I've shared my story lots of places. This is the first time on a broadcast event on television, first time I've been interviewed. Now, this interview took place over 40 minutes of raw footage, and they cut it down to literally about 2 minutes of my interview, interspersed with the interviewer talking and this other person from the Safe House Project, Brittany Dunn, and interspersed us. She was not there during my interview. I was not there with hers, but she talks about, in generalities, about human trafficking to supplement the story. Let me continue with the interview.
Every year, an estimated 300,000 children are victims of sex trafficking. For perspective, that's enough kids to fill the seats of Bank of America Stadium 4 times. And that's every single year.
And Bank of America Stadium, that's the big football stadium where the Charlotte football team, NFL affiliate, plays. It's a local Charlotte station, so they use that for comparison for those people in the Charlotte area to kind of visualize that 300,000 number.
There are many faces to child sex trafficking. Meet one of them.
So, Mike, where would you like to start with your story?
And they show a picture of me as an infant and about the age when my sex abuse started. And it's interesting, they chose to show that photo first. And then they interview me with Hannah Getz, Goetz, who was the reporter who interviewed me. Let me continue. I am currently a survivor of both a childhood sexual abuse, incestual, and family-controlled sex trafficking, both by my father.
Mike Chapman says his face, then and now, represents one type of trafficking that often goes unnoticed.
So they do little snippets interspersed with her explaining more about what I said. So far, so good. I thought, I'm probably the only one because this doesn't happen to guys, it doesn't happen to boys, that you hear all in the news about survivors and it's all little girls, and you don't hear about it happening to little boys.
Chapman tells me he suppressed many of his childhood memories for decades until he started his own healing journey.
Very thrilled with the 40-minute interview. I thought that went really, really well. Concerned about the edit, but we'll get there. So far, so good.
He learned as an adult that he was sexually abused as an infant by his father. He says the abuse continued for years, and that between the ages of 5 and 8, his father trafficked him to other men in what he says were called boy swaps.
I was sedated for most of it, and so the memories are sketchy. They show a picture of me at age 3 and again at age 7, the peak of my trafficking abuse. And that's the haunting picture that you can see the sadness in the eyes. So it's cool they chose that picture. So I'm happy with that. Continuing. And it was me and 2 other boys. The sedative wore off. So we get there. I know exactly what this campground was and where we're going. And they realized, okay, you 3, it was a bunch of dads, a bunch of cars. We were the only 3 boys. They cut. So I don't remember much of it. A whole bunch of other stuff I talked about. And then I talked about this one thing I did remember when I was not sedated, though how they cut it, it sounds like I was sedated. So let me pause before I continue with the video. Part of the training I've been getting with Survivor Network NC, the Speakers Bureau for trafficking survivors, and that we speak all over the state, helping to fight human trafficking, all forms, including sex trafficking, is that with my podcast thing, Power of Story, but having the right to your own story, and that sometimes anti-trafficking groups, well-meaning, will kind of co-opt someone's story and use it for their own materials and so forth without compensating the victim without, sometimes without even permission, then all of a sudden stamping it. Now they own it. It's their copyright. It's like, no, it's my story. You can't do that. And I didn't really understand that until the aftermath of this. Hannah did great. Then the raw footage went to the editor, and the editor cut and pasted stuff together to make this snippet. And again, the overall message that this happens to boys. It is bad, it is evil, and it has lifelong effects. So do not overlook the fact that this happens to little boys. That message loud and clear. Happy with that. Happy with how it ends. We'll get to that too. She threw me a zinger at the end that was like, oh, gut-wrenching. Oh my gosh. But it's the most powerful part of the piece. So I'm happy with that. So overall, happy with the fact that this story got out there to emphasize the fact that this does happen to little boys. Cool. Not happy with the fact that, yeah, my story not only got a little tweaked, it got mangled as far as what was true, what was not. So back to the clip, they are saying that I was sedated and then it was me and two other boys. No, two separate incidents. I was sedated when I was trafficked. I was brought to lots of these little boy swap events from what I've been able to piece together in my history of abuse, with my processing all of the body trauma and body memories and so forth, going through it with therapy, journaling, piecing together all of these truths, trying to understand it, and knowing how these groups tend to operate as well. Knowing that it was over the time period of age 5 to age 8. And what I described with the two other boys was the final event when I was supposed to be trafficked, but I wasn't. And that's what I remember very clearly because the sedation wore off. And that whole thing didn't get discussed. They edited out like I was sedated, but then I was with two boys. If I was sedated, how would I remember because I was sedated? I don't know. So yeah, not happy with how they cut and pasted this together because that's not true at all. Hold on, let me continue.
The individual is preying on that vulnerability, and in the cases of familial trafficking, meeting the needs of a parent who has those sexual desires means that that child sexual abuse enters in very young, and then it just continues to grow with that exploitation.
Brittany Dunn is with the nonprofit Safe House Project, which works to combat human trafficking and help survivors. She says there is no profile for trafficking victims.
And they cut it and they go to the lady from the Safe House Project and they interview her as additional information.
I think it's incredibly important that we don't limit who we believe can be impacted by human trafficking. You know, holistically, we see across the country that probably around 33% of individuals experiencing human trafficking are male. And so if we remove that from the equation, we're missing a large amount of people who really need help being identified or need those support services.
So it was lots of boys, lots of dads in this parking lot, and it was me and two other boys. Okay. What they didn't say was, yes, because the three of us were awake and the sedation wore off on the three of us, you guys go play, you guys stay over there while we then do stuff. And it was basically they were having the boy swap thing with all the other boys who were still sedated inside the buildings, which we were not allowed to get anywhere near. So that's what happened. But they cut all that out and just said it was the three of us and we were the ones who were being trafficked, which is not true. It's actually the opposite. We're the ones who weren't abused on that particular day. Confusing, I know. And then this is now Brittany Dunn and her piece on this. So they interviewed her, and again, she thinks there's no profile for trafficking victims, which we're all different. There's not one set of symptoms, not one set of who, what. It's always this kind of person, it's always that kind of person. No, it can be anyone from any class, any race, any culture, any socioeconomic status, anyone can be a victim. And then she says, I think it's incredibly important that we don't limit who we believe can be impacted by human trafficking. Historically, we see across the country that probably around 33% of individuals experiencing human trafficking are male. And so if we remove that from the equation, we're missing a large amount of people who really need help being identified or need those support services. So, perfect. Yes. Reiterating the point that this happens to males. Males need services. Males also need help. Cool. Thrilled with that. And then Hannah further explains what Safe House Project is. So then they could cut back to me and add a little bit more of my story.
Mike Chapman has dedicated years to healing, battling PTSD, anxiety, and addiction. He now uses his story to help others through life coaching and his podcast, Healing for Male Survivors.
Help is out there. The more you share and the more you hear stories of other survivors, you get this sense of, okay, like camaraderie, but then really it helps inform your own story when you hear the stories of others.
And the video, they insert stuff from my website. Yay! That was cool. It's like they show all the different options that I have on my website and the chat room and the forum and the podcast, scrolling down. So yay! So that's a good part. Yeah. It mentioned the podcast and then go through several episodes. The most recent as of that one was the forgiveness episode, the part 1 and 2, which is cool. So that's when this was published, which is cool. Continuing.
And I'm so honored to be able to bring that by having different survivors on sharing their stories, because that's what got me healing, was hearing stories of survivors.
So now here's the kicker. Here's the gut punch question.
Is there something you would tell 3-year-old, 5-year-old, 8-year-old, 20-year-old you?
That's a good one. A lot of bad stuff happened, but it doesn't mean you're bad and it wasn't your fault.
She asks, what would you tell your younger self? And this is the good one. So she's a great interview, but this was the piece de resistance, as they say. This was a great ending statement. Continuing.
And you're going to be okay. And you're going to find ways to find healing. And you're still going to have a wonderful life. So be patient with yourself. It's going to be okay.
Big, huge sigh. I know. It's like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. How am I going to answer that? That was the one gotcha question. It wasn't horrible, but it really made me think and got me emotional. Yeah, but what came out was really cool. So again, I say bad stuff happened to you. Some of it you don't remember. Some of it you won't remember for a long, long time. Some of it you may never remember. It doesn't mean you're bad, and it wasn't your fault, and you're going to be okay, and you're going to find ways to find healing, and you're still going to have a wonderful life. So be patient with yourself. It's going to be okay. And then the wild thing about this that they got horribly wrong, they then went back and removed this next section from both the written article that accompanies the video and the actual video itself. Here's what got cut, and then they've removed it, but I was able to capture it before it was cut, which I asked them to cut it once I listen to this, and you'll see why.
Him speaking out is going to help so many others
really brave
who
to
are
do.
suffering. Absolutely.
And he says his father died without ever being held accountable. Safe House Project has free online training to spot and report trafficking. It's at IamOnWatch.org. We put a link to the homepage on our website, along with links to nonprofits in our area working to fight human trafficking.
So, yes, they said the line that my father died before he could ever be held accountable for his actions, which was not true at all. That was mind-blowing. No, he's very much alive, thank you. Lives in my home state of Oregon. We'll leave it at that. But yes, apparently the reporter, not her fault, she gave notes, and between the edit and the notes, I think she said, yes, make sure you ask him, is the father still alive? And then they misinterpreted that he wasn't alive and he did die and he was never held accountable. And which, true, he has not been held accountable, but he is still alive. And whoever then wrote the script, the producers or whatever, editors, and then gave that to the newsreader, somehow came up with that and thought that was true when it really wasn't. And I contacted Hannah on this, and she was very apologetic, and she understood how it happened and would make sure that got fixed. And today I went in and looked, and sure enough, it did get removed from both the video and the accompanying article on their website, which is nice. Though, yeah, the other stuff was still murky, is what it is. Yeah, frustrating. Very frustrating. I also, while I was being interviewed, specifically asked, okay, I know you're going to cut this down for air, but we have all this 40 minutes of footage. Are you going to post that footage as well somewhere, or can I get access to it? And she was very positive that they would try to post the full version somewhere, and that also tried to get me access to the full version. Nothing in writing, no promises. When I followed up, it was clear, no, they don't do that. So I must have misunderstood. And it's frustrating talking about owning your story. And I felt like a little bit was taken away, and it was my story taken, shredded, put back together, and then presented for viewer consumption. But that wasn't really my story. Chunks of it were, and there's little half-truths sewn together to make new truths that weren't true. And it's frustrating, very frustrating on how that happened or didn't happen. And I think I'll be more upfront and hopefully rewrite contracts moving forward with media outlets such as this. Definitely a learning experience, though, yeah, it's sad, it's frustrating, but again, overall, thrilled with the final product. That was wonderful. So glad that it was a great experience. I think I did well. One other thing I wanted to mention, the reporter said she got this back from a reader and that she wanted to share that with me to show how powerful the story was. And the person wrote, I just viewed your story on Mike Chapman and his human trafficking experience. You did a great job reporting that story. That final question, though, very well done. I didn't think he was going to be able to answer. I didn't either. But he dug out a gut-wrenching one. It is remarkable that he was able to put together such a fantastic response. Yes, remarkable. I totally agree. That was God. That was pure God giving me the words to say. So thankful that, yeah, happy with that response. Anyway, he continues, such a fantastic response. I'm 63 and have seen a lot of crazy stuff in my life, but I cried. I have no idea how you kept your composure. But great job. You reported the story, but you really let us see the inner strength of Mike Chapman. And that was a male viewer who wrote that. Very cool. Very cool that we got that. And so many times you do something public and you get lots of horrible statements denying all kinds of things. And I've had some public things in the past with some mixed comments out there. And so this was very, very nice to get that comment. So again, Hannah Getz, great job with the interview. Overall, I'm happy with the end result because of the impact that it will have. Not happy with how my story was then horrendously edited to make a nice little package for viewer consumption that resulted in a lot of it not really being true. So that was very frustrating, and lesson learned. Moving forward, I'll be more careful with how my story is presented, and I'm not sure how to go about doing that, but I will update you on that as well. So I think that's it for this special version of the Healing for Male Survivors podcast, and we'll see you next week. If you would like to learn more about my coaching with Polar Live Consulting, where I provide one-on-one coaching and group coaching, both with a focus on healing for male survivors, reach out to me at polarliveconsulting.com. That is Polar spelled Polar. I would love to hear from you. I want to hear your story. If you would like your story featured on this podcast, contact me via my website. If you like this podcast, please rate and review, because that's how other people can find me, and I really want to spread this message of healing and hope to others. And remember, you are not alone. Healing is possible, and the abuse was not your fault. Let me repeat that. The abuse was not your fault. See you next time on the Healing for Male Survivors podcast.